Hi, welcome to episode 2, the long and the short of it. So last time we were talking about Mary Had a Little Lamb. Everybody loves this song. It's the greatest song. It's our greatest thing music has made for humankind ever. It's the greatest song. And in Mary Had a Little Lamb, we were talking about a couple different aspects of rhythm. We talked at first about duration. I didn't maybe stress that enough, but this aspect of musical time is something we call duration. Duration is how long a note lasts. It doesn't matter like where it is metrically, and meter is the other aspect of rhythm of musical time we have. This is one of the hard things about music. In normal everyday life, we think of time as just this one aspect of time of like it's passing from past to present to future. But in music, we have this thing called meter, and is this repeated pattern of stressed and unstressed time points that we talked about last time. But I said next time we'd start with note values. And just to get us caught back up, let's look how Mary Had a Little Lamb looks in notation. So splitting it up into syllables. Right. And I had talked about how if we were going to write it in 4/4, a really common time signature, it would just be a bunch of quarter notes. Mary had a little lamb, and then a quarter rest. This thing is a rest. Remember, a rest is just like a note, except there's no note there. And when we write lyrics, we usually write them under a note and make all the syllables line up. And it's just a convention to split double letters in the middle. Little. Even though if you sang it, you probably would sing little. For some reason, we have this convention of writing it with a split in the letters when it's like that. Little lamb, little lamb, etc. And we talked about how a quarter note is kind of a common kind of note, and these guys are quarter notes. So I just want to talk about the history of notes and talk about different kinds of notes than the quarter note. And you can probably guess that if there's a quarter note PS has a note head. Every note has a note head. And then a stem. And a quarter note can also have a stem coming down this side. And there's different reasons why you want your stems to go up or down, but it means the same thing. So a quarter note always has a filled in oval note head that's at this kind of bias diagonal. And then it has a stem that comes either up and off the right side or down and off the left side. A quarter note, if you can imagine, is half as long as a half note. Half note looks just like a quarter note, but its note head isn't filled in. And so you have an oval note head, not filled in, and a stem, and the stems look just like with the others. A whole note is just an oval. It has no stem. And then there's a thing you'll see every once in a while still today called a double whole note. And it's usually, it looks kind of like a TIE fighter from Star Wars. And it's twice as long as a whole note. And you'll rarely see a note longer than that today. But there used to be longer notes. And in fact, there used to be a note that was called the long, or the longa. And it looked like this. And this note, in olden times, was the longest note. Longa means long, I presume, in Latin. And this note, the note that is so long that we hardly ever see it today, used to be called the brev. Brevity is the soul of wit. You've heard this root before, it means short. So there used to be long notes and short notes. Long and short. Literally, that's what those mean in Latin. And Latin was the language that people wrote stuff in back then. This kind of note used to be called a semibreve. Semibreve. Semi means half a breve. And then this note hardly ever showed up back then, and when it did, it was called a minim. And so this was kind of the palette of ancient music. Ancient meaning, back into the very beginnings of rhythmic notation in music, which, don't quote me on this, I can't remember, it's sometime in like the 1100s or 1200s maybe. Maybe it's earlier, I forget. Point being, we hardly ever even see these two notes before, and now whole note is generally kind of one of the longest notes we see. There's been kind of this tempo inflation over the years. It doesn't mean that our music has gotten faster. It just means what we're representing with these note values is different in how it relates to clock time. And that's the thing to keep in mind about all these note values. They're proportional. There's nothing that says a half note is X number of milliseconds long, or a quarter note is. All we know is a half note is twice as long as a quarter note, and half as long as a whole note. The other aspect, the aspect that connects this proportional system of durations to clock time, is what we call tempo. And tempo tends to today be represented by saying a kind of note and how many times it happens a minute. A lot of pop music and a lot of march music is right around quarter note equals 120. That means there's 120 beats a minute. That comes out to 2 beats a second. Kind of imagine if you're counting seconds, 1,000, 1,000. That's about 120. Michael Jackson's Billie Jean is 120. A lot of times Stars and Stripes Forever is 120. This is a good way you can get tempos in your mind, is by thinking of songs that you know are at those tempos, or tempi, as pedantic people say. Guess what is the next note after a quarter note if we're going down this list? That's right, it's an eighth note. Eighth. An eighth note looks just like a quarter note, but it has a little flag on it. And if the stem goes down, the flag comes out like this. A 16th note comes next. And now things get really regular. A 16th note has 2 flags. And then, you guessed it, a 32nd note is next. A 64th note is next. 128th note. I think I have seen a 256th note once in my life. A 32nd note would have 3 flags. A 64th note would have 4 flags. A 128th note would have 5 flags, and a 256th note would have 6 flags. 6 flags, huh? So, you don't see these super often, but like I said, there's nothing that says a 256th note has to be super fast. If we have just a crazily slow tempo, and say like our quarter note is happening once a minute, then this would be twice, 4 times, 8 times, 16 times, 32 times, 64 times a minute. It would actually still be a pretty slow note, like about a second long. If for some reason our tempo was quarter note equals 1, you probably won't run across this very much. I'm gonna just cross that out. Let's not look at that anymore. There's a whole history that diverged in England that's different for what they call notes. And nowhere but in England and in places of the former British Empire do people use these words, but they're so funny, you gotta know them. People used to call, people in England call quarter notes crotchets. I think maybe people still call whole notes semi-brevs sometimes in England too. Someone English could correct me on that. I don't know about minim, but they definitely say crotchets, and they definitely say quavers, and they definitely say semi-quavers. Semi, remember, just means half. So if you already are going to call an eighth note a quaver, which I think is a great thing to call an eighth note, it sounds, I don't know, it just fits, then half a quaver. And then things start to get really funny, and I don't have these memorized, I admit it. I'm reading off a screen here. A 32nd note is also called a demi-semi-quaver. A 64th note is also called a hemi-demi-semi-quaver. Yeah, for real. A 128th note is called a semi-hemi-demi-semi-quaver. Semi-hemi-demi... Semi-hemi-demi-semi-quaver. I don't know why I'm going down this road, but now I have to finish it. Demi, semi, hemi, demi, semi, quaver. Demi, semi, hemi, demi, semi, quaver. 256 notes. You're not going to see a lot of these. I've never really heard anyone say this except, when they're having this exact same discussion I am right now. All of these are your note values. There's 2 quarter notes in every half note. There's 2 half notes in every whole note. Every quarter note you can break in half and turn it into 2 eighth notes. Every eighth note turns into 2 16th notes, etc. Is this proportional system, always dividing by half or multiplying by 2 as you go down or up this continuum of durational values, none of which are in any consistent and exclusive way linked to clock time. The way we link them to clock time is by tempo. Nowadays we tend to use metronome marks. Before the invention of the metronome, which, wow, that's a good episode to do sometime. It's a great historical story. Before the introduction of the metronome, tempo was usually just indicated by words like, say, allegro, which I think technically means joyful, but when we use it to describe a tempo, it means fast. Or lento, which means slow. Or even something like largo, which means long, as in the notes are long. One last thing. Like I keep saying, rests aren't just like empty space. Rests are notes. So for every one of these notes, there's a rest version. A whole rest looks like a little bar sitting atop a line. A half rest is the same kind of bar, but hanging down from a line. Oops, I got those wrong. That's weird. I'm a doctor of music. A whole rest is a bar that hangs down from a line. A half rest is a bar that comes up from a line. And if you look at a half rest, it looks kind of like a hat. And a hat kind of sounds like half. For some reason, you need a mnemonic device. Quarter note rest, mine looks like this. Go look one up on the internet to see what they really look like. Eighth rest is little, and it looks kind of like that. And then from then on, your rests add flags the same way your notes do. So my 64th note had 4 little flags. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 little flags on my 128th note. And on my demi, semi, hemi, demi, semi quaver, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I like to make little dots for my little flags. So that they have them and look pretty. So every kind of note has a rest. 256 rests, you're not going to see much. Honestly, you see plenty of 30-second notes. Not too often do you get faster than that. 30-second note and its rest is pretty easy to see. 16th rest, 8th rest, quarter rest, half rest, whole rest. I know there's a brev rest, a double whole note rest, but I forget what it looks like. Hold on. Oh yeah, it's like a bar in between 2 lines on the staff that's more tall than long. You're not going to see that super often. So that's it. That's your note value durations. Thank you, and have a glorious day. Goodbye.